Czechoslovakia was officially created on the 28th of October 1918, following the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the First World War. A significant minority of the population were Germans who lived in the Sudetenland, historically rich areas which bordered Germany and the fledgling Austrian nation. At the beginning of 1938, Czechoslovakia was coming under pressure from Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany, which surrounded its western frontiers. Here were the impressive powerhouses of the Czech lands, the factories, mines, and fortifications vital for the Czechs' defense capabilities. The Czechs had an efficient, well-equipped army, but against the enemy within, they had few defenses. The 3 million Germans who lived in the Sudetenland were fed propaganda by the Third Reich. The material was meant to create contempt for the Czechoslovak government. In April 1938, backed by Adolf Hitler, Konrad Henlein, leader of the Nazi-inspired German Sudeten Party, demanded self-government for Sudeten Germans. It was a cruel demand. The Czechs stood to lose not just the Sudeten Germans, but their industrial backbone and defensive strength. The Czech president, Edvard Beneš, had the choice of hanging on to the Sudetenland and risking war with Germany, or giving it up and hoping for peace. He hoped to rely on the support of his people, and France, Czechoslovakia's ally since 1924, to rebuke Nazi threats. His people were up for the fight. He sent out mobilization papers to his well-armed and organized army. But Beneš's appeal for help from France disturbed the French government, led by Édouard Daladier. In April, Daladier flew to London to sound out the British reaction to increasing tension over the Sudetenland. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain told him to expect no help from Britain. The Maginot Line was France's military strategy. These massive fortifications were intended to thwart German aggression. To Daladier and Chamberlain, Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland looked a million miles away. On Sunday, the 12th of September, at Nuremberg, Hitler slammed the Czech government, demanding self-determination for all Sudeten Germans. Taking encouragement from the Führer's words, Henlein incited the Sudeten Germans to arm themselves and rise up. The Czech-German border suddenly became the scene of atrocities, as the government forbade the police to use weapons, and could only use their fists in disputes. In Habsburg, near Folknov, an entire gendarme were wiped out by villagers, who ran amok after being egged on by Hitler's outburst. Near Locket, a postmaster and his wife were caught in bed by a mob, and beaten to death with iron bars. The situation threatened to rapidly embroil Europe into war. British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, decided to intervene. He flew out to meet Hitler face-to-face to save the peace. At the Eagle's Nest, the Führer's mountainous retreat overlooking the Bavarian town of Berchtesgaden, Chamberlain gave in to Hitler's demands. He conceded self-determination for the Sudeten Germans. Now, his peace plan had to be put to the British Parliament, the French and, last but not least, the Czechs. On the 18th of September, Daladier came to London to discuss the peace terms agreed by Chamberlain. Eventually, he too accepted Hitler's demands. Now, everything hinged on the response of the Czechs. If they decided to resist, they would have to go it alone. As Wehrmacht forces assumed positions along his nation's borders, and with no support, the Czechoslovak president felt compelled to accept the terms of the agreement. A triumphant Chamberlain set off to tell Hitler the good news. But his second meeting with the Führer, on the 22nd, was humiliating. There were several more demands, that the Sudetenland must be surrendered at once, and Polish and Hungarian claims on Czech lands must be met. Chamberlain refused to accept the request. War seemed imminent. Flying back to London, Chamberlain envisaged British cities laid waste by bombs. He said, "How horrible, fantastic, incredible it is that we should be digging trenches and trying on gas masks here, because of a quarrel in a faraway country, between people of whom we know nothing." Plans were made to move children out of the threatened capital. Hurriedly, more aircraft were turned out. But Britain's air defenses were still weak and thinly spread. There had to be a way out, more time to get the armaments program off the ground. When Italian leader Mussolini suggested a four-power conference, Neville Chamberlain seized the moment. Perhaps there was still time to settle the Czech question by international peace agreement. Chamberlain left London's Heston Airport for Munich on the morning of Thursday, the 29th of September, to meet with Hitler, Mussolini, and Lidice at the Führer's headquarters, the Brown House.
When I was a little boy, I used to repeat, if at first you don't succeed, try again. That's what I'm doing. When I come back, I hope I may be able to say, as Hotspur says in Henry IV, out of this nettled danger, we pluck this flower safety.
Late in the evening, Germany, Italy, France, and Great Britain agreed to hand over the Sudetenland to the Third Reich. The Czechs were not consulted. They were free to resist by themselves if they wished. The Munich Agreement was formalized at around 2 a.m. on Friday. It would have tremendously significant ramifications for the people of Czechoslovakia. The German army was to complete the occupation of the Sudetenland by the 10th of October, and a commission would decide the future of other disputed areas. Chamberlain's aeroplane landed at Heston Aerodrome on the 30th of September, and he spoke to the crowds there.
To say that the settlement of the Czechoslovakian problem, which has now been achieved, is, in my view, only the prelude to a larger settlement in which all Europe may find peace.
Later, he addressed the press outside 10 Downing Street, again reading from the document, before concluding, "I believe it is peace for our time." With the end in sight, Dr. Edvard Beneš resigned as president of Czechoslovakia on the 5th of October, 1 week after the Sudetenland was ceded to Nazi Germany.
The Nazi regime, because of its moral disintegration, its political brutality, the slavery which it imposes, its internal and external policy, which so deeply offend all feelings of human decency, because of all that it has perpetrated in Central Europe, will fall.
Meanwhile, the Munich Treaty, which sealed the fate of Czechoslovakia and its people, was initially seen as a triumph of British diplomacy. Many saw Chamberlain as the archetypal peace campaigner, evidenced by the thousands of telegrams of thanks and gifts he received. All this before he had presented the agreement to the British Parliament. However, the euphoria began to sour despite royal patronage, as unconditional relief turned to reflection on what Great Britain had done to the people of Czechoslovakia. In particular, attitudes began to change significantly following the debates in the House of Commons on the 3rd and 4th of October, which saw several MPs criticize the Prime Minister for showing obsequiousness towards Hitler and Mussolini. Attlee, Labour opposition leader, in his address, stated the following: "This has not been a victory for reason and humanity. It has been a victory for brute force. Today we have seen a gallant, civilized and democratic people betrayed and handed over to a ruthless despotism." Winston Churchill declared, "We have suffered a total and unmitigated defeat. You will find that in a period of time, Czechoslovakia will be engulfed in the Nazi regime." Following Hitler's annexation of Austria, in March, the British Trades Union Congress and the miners' unions grew increasingly vocal about the British government's foreign policy. At its conference at Blackpool, a statement was issued by the TUC executive stating, "Every consideration of democracy forbids the dismemberment of the Czechoslovakian state by the subjection of the Sudeten German regions to Nazi government control." The British government must leave no doubt in the mind of the German government that it will unite with the French and Soviet governments to resist any attack upon Czechoslovakia. The reaction by Britain's miners to news that Czechoslovakia had indeed been dismembered was strong and swift, with the following statement issued by the president of the Mine Workers' Federation of Great Britain, Joe Jones, on the 4th of October. The Executive Committee of the Mine Workers' Federation of Great Britain, representing nearly 600,000 British miners, expresses its deep disgust with the action of the British government in sacrificing Czechoslovakia to the insatiable appetite of the dictators. It regards the foreign policy of the national government during the last few years as being that of an accomplice to the murder of the smaller democracies, and as a betrayal of all that is decent in international relations. The Czechoslovakian people felt utterly dismayed by the Munich settlement. They had not been invited to the conference and felt abandoned by the British and French governments. Upon hearing news of the agreement, Czechoslovakian Foreign Minister Jan Masaryk said, "If you have sacrificed my nation to preserve the peace of the world, I will be the first to applaud you. But if not, gentlemen, God help your souls." With the Sudeten not ceded to Germany, Czechoslovakia lost its defensible border and fortifications, so its independence became more nominal than real. Due to the settlement, Czechoslovakia lost 70% of its staple industries, 70% of its electrical power, and 3.5 million citizens to Germany. Meanwhile, many Sudeten Germans celebrated what they saw as their liberation. The disintegration of Czechoslovakia continued on the 14th of March, 1939, when Slovakia seceded from its sister and became a puppet Nazi state under the dictatorship of Josef Tiso. The same day, the man charged with holding the remnants of the Czech lands together, new president, Emil Acher, traveled to Berlin to see Hitler. During the meeting with Hitler, Acher was threatened with the obliteration of Prague if he refused to order the Czech troops to lay down their arms. The stress induced a heart attack. Only an injection from Hitler's doctor revived him. Aceh felt compelled to sign the order accepting the German occupation of the rest of Bohemia and Moravia. According to the official communiqué issued in Berlin, at 3 a.m. that morning, Aceh placed the fate of the Czech people and lands, trustingly into the hands of the Führer. However, there was a tense political drama in Prague, as the Czech Council of Ministers was summoned in extraordinary session to consider options. At 5 a.m., the government spokesman, with tears in his eyes, told a press correspondent that German troops were about to march into the rest of the Czech lands. The first German soldiers entered Prague at 9:30 a.m. An hour later, they were followed by mechanized columns, which rumbled through the main streets to Wenceslas Square. There was some hostility, and some Czechs sang their national anthem as the armored parade drove past. But there were few violent disturbances. Most of the chief administrative buildings, including the Ministry of Defense, the General Post Office, and Prague Castle, were immediately occupied. Soon after the occupation of Prague, Konstantin von Neuert was appointed Reichsprotector, serving as Hitler's representative in the Protectorate. A wave of arrests began, mostly refugees from Germany, Jews and Czech public figures. By November, Jewish children had been expelled from their schools, and their parents fired from their jobs. Universities and colleges were closed after demonstrations against the occupation of Czechoslovakia. Over 1,200 students were sent to concentration camps, and 9 student leaders were executed on International Students' Day, the 17th of November. Chamberlain felt betrayed by the Nazi seizure of Czechoslovakia. He realized his policy of appeasement towards Hitler had failed and took a much harder line against Nazi Germany. He immediately mobilized the British Empire's armed forces to a war footing, and France and her colonies mobilized too. Although no immediate action followed, Hitler's invasion of Poland on the 1st of September ignited the Second World War.